Hello and welcome to the channel's book club. In today's episode, we'll show you interviews with two fascinating authors who you can describe as accomplished intellectuals. First is Pius Adesanmi, who is an acclaimed literary and cultural critic. Pius resides primarily in Ottawa, Canada, where he teaches literature and African studies at Carleton University. He is often described as one of Nigeria's leading intellectuals. His first book, The Wayfarer and Other Poems, won the Association of Nigerian Authors Poetry Prize in 2001. He joined us to discuss his relatively recent and intriguing book titled You Are Not a Country, Africa, and Other Related Issues. The interview is courtesy of Ake Arts and Book Festival. Enjoy it. It's nice to have you here, Pius.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
You've become very popular and your views have become much more respected recently, particularly on the social media. Tell us a bit about your story. Some people think you just emerged overnight.
It all started in Ibadan, properly speaking, in the early 1990s. So I wrote a lot of poetry, I wrote a lot of short stories, so it was a literary effervescence, that it also developed around newspaper houses, certain key newspaper, because the traditional channels of publication and expression were drying up, the military era and all that. So you have the literary pages of newspapers. So we came to dominate literary discourse in the country. I was in that context that I produced my first two collections. The second collection was actually much more successful than the first collection. The first collection, I never published it, but it did get, I believe, an honorable mention in one of the other competitions back then. But the second collection, which I completed in 1999, by then I had left the country, did win. It was published in 2000, The Wayfarer and Other Poems, and it won the Anna Poetry Prize in 2000, but even before the poetry was published, throughout the 90s, I evolved very gradually as a major contributor to cultural and critical and literary discourse in the country. There was the Post-Express Literary Supplement, the Vanguard Arts page, the Guardian Arts page. So I was very, very regular, frequent, on those pages. So things just evolved from there. It did evolve along political lines, subsequently. But that's how it all started. Yeah, the 90s. That's where I would look at. But I left in 1998, I believe. But I've always maintained a presence, through my writings.
How do you think your book will be received in Nigeria? Do you think it's going to be generally accepted?
The critical audience of this book is not going to buy it. It probably make its way to Glendora bookshop, airports, and all these very cool spaces. That's why the bulk of my writing, the book is a very restrictive and constricting medium of expression for me, really. For me, my book is the internet. That's where I've got massive followership, and I tend to cater more, to the reading proclivities, the reading preference, not proclivities, preference, of those who can access me on the palm of their hands. I still got to do the book because, hey, we got to write books, but I'm more interested in what the Nigerian is holding in the palm of his hands, his handset, because that's where he's doing most of his reading these days, and so there are versions of what I try to do, whichever message I'm trying to get across these days in my writing. You can be sure that it is going on simultaneously in accessible formats and in witty, less cumbersome formats, online, in social media, where I've got some followership. Our reading culture, like everything else, every area of our national life, Yeah, it's so I say reading culture or reading public advisedly because but what people don't know about this problem with reading is that I think there is a deliberateness to it. I think it was purposed, I think a citizenry that would over time evolve to love reading was groomed deliberately. There are people somewhere who need to run Nigeria the way Nigeria is run. And they cannot afford to have a reading public. They can't afford to have an informed citizenry. They can't afford to feed the minds of the people. It doesn't go together. So that you see that there's this systemic. And so when the Nigerian says, I beg, too much grammar, dogon turenchi, this and that, na book we go chop, and all those kinds of statements, everyday statements, he doesn't understand that there is a historicity, that there is a broader ideological paradigm at work that has shaped him and brought him to that condition. So yeah, over the years, those for whom a reading public is dangerous have ensured that poverty of the mind has grown incrementally. And so that's why sometimes you are amazed that things happen and the way the people react. They defend because they have not read the books, because the mind is not fed. So they are not equipped. So we have to talk about reading culture advisedly, in that context. So with somebody like me, what I try to do, and that's why I have been so aggressive in terms of taking my ideas to social media, knowledge. The street is my classroom now. So I have transcended the classroom the way we know it. It doesn't matter whether I'm writing as a creative writer, whether I'm writing as a producer of non-fiction, or whether I'm writing as a literary thinker or literary theorist. I have moved beyond the classroom because I have noticed that the only way we are going to get anywhere is to gradually, it's a painstaking labor of love. It attracts only insults. You should go to social media sometimes and see the commentary of Nigerians, even to the simplest things, the most unsophisticated expression of thought, apathy, hostility, and outright insults. But it's got to be done. Those minds have got to be repaired. Those psychologies have got to be rewired, is my favorite expression. And we can only do that by taking advantage of the new modes of cultural consumption. And social media happens to be the cutting edge, or at the cutting edge of those new modes of cultural consumption. So that the average Nigerian who loads reading actually underestimates how much reading he or she now does every day by browsing.
Let's talk about your new book, You Are Not a Country, Africa. What inspired it? Tell us a bit about it.
The country Africa, it's new here in Nigeria, so I have to put new in context because it's been published, it's been out now for 2 years, because it won the Penguin Prize for African writing, in South Africa. It's published in South Africa, but has been distributed mainly in the West, because the South Africans have a way of thinking that they are not part of Africa, the continent. So even their literature and culture, their cultural industry is westward facing. So the moment this book was published, it's all over South Africa, it's in Europe, it's in North America. It's never really had any kind of showing here in Nigeria. So this festival has made it possible for it to make its Nigerian outing. So it's only new in that sense. So it's a collection of essays, and the genre here is creative nonfiction, in which I tried to again, like I told you, I've been living in the West now since 1998. Did my PhD in Vancouver, the University of British Columbia, and then I went to the United States. I started my very first job as an academic. Taught there from 2001 to 2006, so that's 5 years in the US at Penn State University, and then I returned to Canada. So that's an entire canvas of experiences in which I have constantly had to negotiate all kinds of identities. Identities I didn't even know I had or would have to deal with when I was here in Nigeria. The moment you step out of Nigeria, the moment you step out of the continent, then identity becomes very pressing, and then you are called upon to answer all kinds of the African. That's when you become an African. So for 15 years I've been wrapping my mind around that concept. Who is this African that we become when we leave Africa? All of a sudden, you are Yoruba here, you are Igbo here, you are Christian, we are anything but African here. But you move there, and it doesn't matter whether you're circulating in Europe, in North America, or even in even in South Africa.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been fun.